Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the McCune Charitable Foundation. And the Nieper Natural History Programming Fund for KNME-TV. And viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, will lawmakers decide on a better way to redraw political boundaries? We talk redistricting.
I thought everyone came with some expectations of the process being transparent, at least in the way we worked as a task force.
Plus, the return of our land as we examine how we name and rename important places. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Gene Grant. Now, we've played it safe around here during the pandemic at New Mexico PBS, which is why it's always nice when we can bring you new adventures outdoors. We'll take you to the wilds of Grants, New Mexico later in the show. The Line talks redistricting this week as well, as we mentioned. Our Line opinion panel also looks at former Republican Phillips Anderson's fateful vote on that abortion bill. We begin with an effort to boost business for restaurants by making a change to New Mexico's liquor laws. Here's the Line. New Mexico's liquor laws, and maybe more specifically its liquor licenses, have long been a maze of rules and regulations that apply to one business, but not the next, depending on what license they hold. Now, one rule holds firm, though: no alcohol delivery. During the pandemic, many restaurants say that will let the air out of an already deflated profits. A new law could change that, but is it the right move? Our Line opinion panel this week, attorney and regular panelist Laura Sanchez is back with us. Good to see you here. And two returning guests join us as well. Editorial page editor for the Santa Fe New Mexican, that would be Inez Russell Gomez. And owner and founder of Vox Optima Public Relations, that would be Merritt Allen. She returns as well. Merritt, staying with you. Based on what you've seen of this legislation, is New Mexico playing with fire here?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, this has been the messiness of our liquor license regulations has, resulted in one great thing, and that's the rise of the micro distillery.
Right.
Because if you make it on premises, you can sell it on premises. Little Toad Creek in Silver City, probably my favorite example of this, but it's a trend that has really expanded throughout the state. And, it's time to even the playing field. I think the concerns of the existing old school 6 or 7 figure dollar liquor licenses, I understand their concern, but, this, as many people give the example, this is like letting Uber into a market with taxi drivers in the large metro areas, so much for their medallions. My thought is, if you have an existing old school liquor license, you get excused from GRT for a year.
Well, I want to come back to that, because the whole thing about the value of somebody holding a $500,000 or more liquor license and what that means now. Laura Sanchez, I want to get to something that I hear on the street a lot, and that is this idea that a delivery person is going to be standing at the front door of someone's home trying to determine if they are drunk or not, to be able to hand them that alcohol. Is this actually a doable scheme in your mind when you picture this scenario?
Certainly that's one of the concerns that I have about it. There is a lot of discretion that's required. Delivery drivers often use this. I know a lot of teenagers, young adults that do this kind of work. So I think we would need to adjust the age of folks who are driving to deliver alcohol, probably, and not just over 21 necessarily, but maybe 25. There needs to be a level of maturity where you sort of have a lot more to lose if something should go wrong. So discretion, I think, will be very important. You certainly don't want to get into a situation where somebody's making an order and then their buddies are the ones delivering it for later or something like that. I mean, it's just fraught with potential misuse and problems. So, but I think that all of those concerns should be addressed, and there should be a process of empowering the regulation and licensing department to determine, rules and regulations that could deal with that sort of a scenario, and not necessarily legislate it so specifically. I don't think those concerns are a reason not to explore this option, because I think it would be a huge a revenue producer for local businesses that have been hit hard. And many of the upscale places, do in many cases their own craft distillery liquor or other wines or beers, and it would be a huge boon for them financially.
Inez, interesting when you think about it. It's hard to think this would be anything but a boon, as Laura's describing it, for restaurants. Is this the clear ticket we think it is? Are we seeing this clearly? I mean, we have vaccinations going. We have a lot of things happening that may not necessarily make for home delivery, that impactful. How are you seeing this as it plays along over the next couple of months?
I think once people can go out again, they're going to want to be sitting on patios in the summer having drinks and snacks with their friends. They're not going to want to get liquor deliveries at the house. So the impact may not be what it would have been had they been able to do it, let's say 6 months ago.
Right.
And I believe the governor was hoping it would be considered during the special session in June. On the other hand, if you're home late at night and you want a nice meal and some wine, being able to get it delivered is better than going out for some people. So it just seems like it expands your choices without necessarily turning it into something where people just drink all the time at home or, are greeting you at the door drunk. I'm really more interested in expanding liquor licensing because we created a system that protected people who already had,
right,
while limiting the market to people who wanted to open up, let's say, a nice corner restaurant, that kind of thing. And if you want, let's say, an Albuquerque downtown where people from Netflix are going out after work to have drinks and dinner and walk around, it seems like more is going to expand the pie for everybody. So I think the legacy liquor holders might want to think about what it's going to be like when dinner guests it's expanding. I think this is an opportunity to grow our economy so that everyone benefits. And yes, you might have to do something to help the people who invested more in their liquor license, but you're also going to make it more available to young entrepreneurs so that the only people in New Mexico who are buying liquor licenses aren't big chains or people who've had them for, 50 years.
Which is the case as we have now. I mean, it would shock most people, the companies out of state that own New Mexico liquor licenses here would just, big conglomerates. It's just not workable. Laura, the idea of someone being able to lay down $3,000 and, get a liquor license as opposed to the folks that paid $500,000, there's ideas out there to lessen the blow, but can this really be done without a full, and I mean a full accounting financially for people that hold licenses currently? Is a tax abatement going to work for them? I mean, there's all kinds of ideas out there. But we're talking about something they paid a lot of money for suddenly going to almost zero or 3,000 in value, if you think about it.
Well, so I think that it's important to think about people who hold that liquor license as, a piece of property that has value, but they've also had a lot of use out of that piece of property.
Hadn't thought about that.
So, there are also those that have multiple, that own or hold multiple licenses, and then, may have a restaurant or something, and then they actually lease or license the other liquor license to another new establishment. That happens a lot. So we have this secondary market that's been functioning for a long time. There's value in the use of it, and so somehow there will need to be some consideration for that. What's been the use of it? How do those people still retain it? But it isn't just a static thing. Like, we're not talking about something that, increases in value necessarily like the stock market. I mean, the value is in, yes, the market, but also the use of it. If you have a liquor license and you're not actually using it, the fact that you hold on to it doesn't mean a whole lot. It's your ability to license it out to somebody else or to actually use it to open something that has its value. So somehow there needs to be a consideration of all of those factors in determining that process. Again, legislating something that's that specific, it's tricky because then you're bound by whatever's in the law. I favor, the broad strokes of a system and then empowering a state agency to deal with a rulemaking where you have a lot more time than 60 days to have input from the community, from businesses, from others that would be impacted.
Yes, thank you for getting that in there. Guys, we can't get out of this if we don't talk about treatment. Merritt, the idea of holding harmless or, keeping people from harming themselves, that kind of thing. How does that argument fit into this whole idea of home liquor delivery?
To Laura's point, it is probably impossible to get a perfect bill in 60 days. Mm-hmm. So some of this will have to go to licensing and regulation bureaus. We have a system in place for over-serving, and we have training that servers have to go through, and pretty hard over on that. I do think the delivery aspect certainly goes to the same thing. You first of all, your servers have to go through training. And so to be a driver for an entity that is serving alcohol and delivers alcohol, you'd have to go through training, which would add a cost. It might be more expensive. I mean, I would assume to have liquor delivered would be a lot more expensive than going to Total Wine or a juice and buying a bottle yourself. And so that premium on that delivery bottle would fold in all of that training.
That's a good point. I appreciate you bringing that up. And I'm also curious what's going to happen when someone decides, meaning a delivery person, decides someone on private property, standing on their own threshold of their own home, decides they're too drunk to accept a bottle of wine or a six-pack of beer. I don't know. We'll see what the courtrooms have to say about that. All right, we're out of time on this, but there's sure to be more debate as these bills work their way through the legislature. Our Land is next. We all have a connection to the place we live, but what do we call those places? And whose names are considered the right ones or the valid ones? In this month's episode of Our Land, correspondent Laura Paskus talks with the Pueblo of Acaba's Teresa Pascual and also Representative Deb Haaland about reconciling with the past and making sure places don't include racial slurs so everyone feels at home on the landscape. We talked with Representative Haaland in late December before she was nominated to head up the Department of Interior for President Biden. Now, there's a lot to cover, and you can watch a longer interview at the Our Land page on nmpbs.org.
Snap open a map and read the place names listed across the landscape. Those words, the place names on the map, they're decided by the U.S. Board on Geographic Names. The federal agency was created more than a century ago to standardize place names throughout the United States, so we all call places by the same names. But the world outside is different from what you find on paper or a screen. Just think of how you describe places. At the Metate in the sandstone. Meet me where the porcupines are. Let's hike the trail where you saw the hummingbird last summer. Here in New Mexico and across the United States, Indigenous people have moved across these landscapes for millennia. And naming a place didn't mean claiming ownership. Teresa Pascual with the Pueblo of Acoma talks about this.
Our tradition lies in connecting those values, the things that we see, our core values of who we are that are associated with place, that are associated with an individual, and then transferring our hopes, our prayers for that person or that place by giving that same name. And so as our people moved on this landscape throughout time, then it also became important that our people, as they moved through their migrations across the Southwest, continued to not only remain connected to place, but also keep with them those values of place, those gifts of place that Creator imbued with those locations, to take those with us as part of our collective memory and carry those names forward with us as we settled into what is now the Acoma Valley.
Carrying names forward is a sign of respect, a sign of connection. a way to guide people from the past through today and into the future.
This connection is layered because of time, but it's also complex because it connects us not just to the physical landscape that we have that surrounds us, but to everything that is associated within that landscape.
More than a decade ago, tribes came together to protect what's called Mount Taylor, west of Albuquerque, from new uranium mines. Each tribe has their own name for the mountain, their own stories, their own connections.
I had one elder who explained to the U.S. Forest Service that the mountain, in a sense, was almost as if there was a blanket spread out from the top, that this covered not just the peak of the mountain, which many outsiders believe that the mountain was literally just its peak. From a traditional perspective, it also encompassed the mesas and the valleys and the valley floor, and that connection began to be as far as the eye could see. When you're thinking from a perspective that forces you to define boundaries.
That means not seeing a place as a single point, but looking at a mountain and seeing the mesas that swell from its hips, acknowledging the snows that fall and in the spring flow to gardens and orchards, to appreciate the waters people drink and use in ceremonies. All of these things are connected, even if we seem to forget that today. Across our maps, there are also places with names that are racist, that make people feel unwelcome, like their stories don't matter. Last year, Representative Deb Haaland and Texas Representative Al Green introduced the Reconciliation in Place Names Act.
These places, they belong to all of us, right? They don't just belong to one person or one group of people. We felt very strongly that all visitors to our public lands and our public spaces, they deserve to feel welcome and comfortable while enjoying those places. These offensive and racist place names, those are sort of relics of the past.
Haaland and Green feel it's time to reconcile that. If passed, this bill would bring people from all different communities to make recommendations to the Board on Geographic Names, to make changes that are respectful of one another.
How some of our pueblos have changed their names back to their original Native American names. I think it matters to a community of people what things are called. Each community should be able to decide.
A report last year found hundreds of federally recognized places with racial slurs.
Some of those in New Mexico, some landmarks that are being talked about for renaming in the bill: Squaw Peak, Chinaman Hills, Jim Crow Shaft. Those are places I don't think that have any relevance essentially to maybe those New Mexico landmarks. Those bring up a racist past.
And like Mount Taylor, named for the 12th President of the United States, plenty of places bear the names of people who never loved or respected them, or the people living nearby.
When I was in college, I had a professor who used to say, you can tell a country by who their heroes are. And who are our heroes, right? Are they folks who have stood up for underrepresented communities? Are they folks who have stood up and worked hard for vulnerable communities?
Pasquale explains that when we move through landscapes, we create our own stories and memories, and those are layered on the countless stories that came before.
When we go out into place, that we carry a responsibility to know more, to know about these places that surround us so that we can protect them, so that we can conserve them, and so that we can also give that gift to others and say, you know, there was a great place I hiked, you know, on such and such a day, and this is its story, and I think you should go there. And so we pass those gifts on to other people.
For Our Land and New Mexico in Focus, I'm Laura Paskus.
Lifelong Republican and State Representative Phelps Anderson is still one of those things, but after voting to repeal an unenforceable law that criminalizes abortion procedures, Anderson's Republican colleagues and Republican constituents seem to think it was time for him to leave. Mr. Anderson won't resign, but he's changed his voter registration and is now the House's only independent. He won't caucus with Republicans. The law could only be enforced if the Supreme Court overturns Roe versus Wade in some way, but reproductive rights advocates say that's a real possibility with the latest iteration of the Supreme Court. And Inez, Mr. Anderson has been quiet about his decision to vote to repeal the law. And a reminder, he changed his vote from the last time this bill was in front of him. What do you think? What do you make of this dust up?
I just wish he would tell us why.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if he realized that now it is likely that Roe v. Wade will be overturned given the Supreme Court. So because it was real, he changed his vote, or whether he met a voter or maybe someone in his family who said, here's why women need to have choices over their own reproductive systems. And I would just love to hear from him. I remember when I was young that there were pro-abortion choice Republicans and anti-abortion choice Democrats,
Right.
and both parties seemed to have room for a little dissension on the edges, even if they did have a party platform that said we're against abortion or we're for abortion. And I think that big tents can be tricky, but when there's room for differing views, sometimes you come up with better policy. And I'm sorry that really both parties are so limiting to what you can believe or not believe. I mean, Phelps Anderson isn't going to vote for Democratic economic initiatives. He's probably not going to be a big, voice against pro-gun things. So he would be a solid Republican vote, except maybe this one time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think parties might want to be more welcoming to different viewpoints sometimes.
Merritt, pick up on that. Is there an opportunity here, or is there something for the Republican Party here in New Mexico to think about?
Well, certainly, I think they do have a vote on key issues. Of course, the Republican minority in the New Mexico House is pretty. It's pretty marked.
Mm-hmm.
They have fewer seats almost now more than ever. So. There's really not a lot of impact unless they build coalitions across the aisle to defeat specific bills.
Does the party in some way gain in this situation?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so. And I don't blame Representative Anderson for keeping his counsel. I think it's pretty clear. I'm not an insider to the state Republican Party or the caucus. You can assume perhaps he felt some pressure. He voted as he did. He has changed his affiliation. Andy Nunez had done this in the past. Right. We have had incidents in the past. And, I just want to point out, I am going to disagree with Inez. I don't think that this bill, for the second time it's been brought up, I don't think this changes the state of abortion in New Mexico. I think this is political maneuvering. I think it's a political grenade thrown. I think certainly the Republicans have a decades-long history of weaponizing abortion. I think the Democrats have picked up on it. I think they're weaponizing it this time to weed out moderates or conservative Democrats. I think it doesn't do much. It did nothing in a 30-day session except make people mad. I think it's making people mad in this session. But I don't think this bill, whether it passes or fails, is going to change access to abortion in New Mexico.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Laura, I got maybe it seems like an obvious question here, but don't Democrats do the same thing here? Isn't there a litmus test of a sorts with Democrats? I mean, even this particular bill has been a litmus test for Democrats in their level of progressiveness, so to speak. Is this the same thing, just other side of the coin?
Yeah, I mean, I think we absolutely do that as Democrats. And I think that we see across the state, if you look at the last election and those who were challenged in the primary and then lost their seat, and a couple which flipped then to Republican, we're seeing the same sort of thing where there's more of a polarization, there's more of a push to become, I think, on the one hand, and the Republicans to be more conservative. Of course, the influence of Trump and that happening across the country will have that effect. But you see the same thing on the Democrat side. You see this progressive push where groups from the metro areas that might be more progressive in terms of the voters going into rural areas and attacking incumbent Democrats like John Arthur Smith. And I know that district in particular because it's my home district, but John Arthur Smith was a conservative Democrat. He had done a lot in terms of fiscal responsibility, was beloved in that community. And then when he was taken out by a more progressive Democrat, it flipped Republican. And I would be surprised if it ever flips back, to be honest, because there's just different flavors of Republican and Democrat across the state. And I think that, to Merritt's point, we do need to figure out a way to be more welcoming in general, or was it Inez? I can't remember who said it, but we need to be more welcoming in both parties. Otherwise, we're going to end up with this polarized and everybody's going to sort of just follow suit or be expected to, or else you're out. And the reality is we have to figure out how those representatives and senators reflect their district and not necessarily some agenda that's imposed upon them. So that's something that just, I think is really important for New Mexico, given that urban versus rural split. And that I think is more of a concern for me, is rural versus urban and how polarized those issues become.
Good points there. Inez, Laura makes an interesting point. The seat is fairly safe when you think about it. It represents portions of Chavez-Lee and Roosevelt counties. And Mr. Anderson, he first got in 2018, his 2-year term. He was in the House from 77 through 80. Is there a danger of this seat going one way or the other? Does this upset anything particularly?
I wouldn't think so. I mean, that's going to be a Republican seat no matter who holds it. Mm-hmm. And what I prefer is that voters punish you if you stray too far, because part of it is polarization, but part of it is also being able to keep your promises. So if the governor runs in 2018 saying, I will get rid of this abortion ban, which will change how abortions can be delivered if the Supreme Court rules against Roe v. Wade. Merritt is absolutely right. There's no change right now. This is getting ready for what is likely to happen. Because should Roe v. Wade be struck down by the Supreme Court, there's a decent chance that in New Mexico, abortion wouldn't be able to happen the way it would, and that it would criminalize doctors. So if you're saying as a party, this is our platform, but you have 6 or 7 Democrats in the Senate who are then saying, we're not going to let you get to that. I think, it's every bit the voters' right to say, then we're going to get Democrats who will vote for that. And it's the same with Mr. Anderson. If he wanted to run again, then his voters would go ahead and say, yes, we support you anyway, or we don't support you. But I think in general, it would be nice if there was a little more room for some differing viewpoints, not just on abortion. Think about early childhood.
Right.
And how some people were more fiscally concerned and other people were more concerned about delivering childhood. So you just have to consider how big a tent you're going to have.
Good point there. Merritt, I see you in agreement there. Pick up on that. It really is the voters who are going to decide this, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think in particular, and that's why I see abortion in particular is weaponized. And I just want to note, the Supreme Court has been majority conservative for much longer than under the Trump presidency. And they never overturned Roe v. Wade. And in particular, the Supreme Court tends to it's not their practice to overturn an existing decision. So that's why I say I don't think it's likely. I just wanted to put that out. But it is up to the voters to decide. And the impression I get looking at polls is the majority of Americans and the majority of New Mexicans want abortion to be legal. And then on the other side, there are some procedures that maybe New Mexicans and Americans aren't as comfortable with. And on the abortion debate, it's either all or nothing. Clear, dramatic, and that's where people get polarized. And that's why I hate seeing an issue like this, and I keep saying it, get weaponized. And this is the bill in question is one sentence long. It's repealing an unenforceable law, and everybody's just lost their mind over it. And it makes me sad because to Laura's and Inez's point, there should be more room. for everybody to have an opinion on either side, and voters should also be able to have an opinion on either side and not be somehow ostracized for it.
Good place to end that segment. That was actually really well done. Hey, speaking of representation, we're going to switch gears here with both the line and the show and talk about redistricting. Now, later this year, New Mexico will get official census data and begin the process of redrawing the political boundaries for both congressional seats and the state house and Senate. You've seen us profile New Mexico's tortured redistricting process here on the show before. The last two times it's happened, a court ended up making the final decision. The folks at New Mexico First have convened a group to study the process. In their recommendations, form a nonpartisan commission to do it. Seems to have some momentum in the form of legislation. Here's Gwyneth Dolan with two members of the panel, former Supreme Court Justice Edward Chavez and geographer Dr. Cedric Page.
Justice Chavez and Dr. Page, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for having us.
Justice Chavez, you co-chaired this task force of about 24 people, a bipartisan group working on redistricting. Was there a consensus among you that the way we do redistricting now is, to put it politely, not good?
Yeah, I think if there was a consensus of anything, it's that we needed to propose something that would fix the existing system because it simply hasn't worked. Last couple of decades, the courts drew the maps at several $million taxpayer expense. So we put our heads together, and there were a lot of talented people, and came up with some really good solutions. One of them, which is a redistricting commission.
I want to ask you about that, but before we get to it, Dr. Page, tell me about, you had a lot of recommendations. Tell me about some of the ones that you particularly like and think would be effective if they were adopted.
Thank you. Well, I came on the commission with a background in geography. So my interests were, how is the final map going to look in terms of representing the communities of interest that exist throughout the state? So my focus was on, the process. How are we going to get the information, either census or other information, that allowed us to draw districts that were representative of the voters living throughout different areas of the state? So that was my primary interest in coming on board, is make sure that the communities of interest, however they're defined by culture, language, concerns about whether the area was represented because this was a common economic zone, was primary reasons for my involvement. I also represented the Santa Fe branch of the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And so my interest there was in equity and making sure that communities of color were represented in the final redrawing of the district.
I wanted to ask you that because, if for people who've been watching the national news over redistricting the past few times, it's very obviously been used through history to disenfranchise voters of color. And even here in New Mexico, the state has been sued for intentionally or for having the effect of diluting the voting power of specifically Native American voters and Hispanic voters. Is there something more that we can do to ensure that all of those votes count the same?
Well, I think one of the steps that we took on the task force was to include the voices of the Native American communities, primarily the Navajo Nation. I think you would agree, Justice Chavez, so that we really understood the interests that they had in this process and the concerns that they've had about being undercounted, if you will, or underrepresented in past efforts to do redistricting.
Justice Chavez, some of the lawmakers who were on your task force are sponsoring bills in the legislature right now that would take the redistricting process away from politicians and give it to a commission? You know, for the past few years, we've seen some proposals like this, mostly through a constitutional amendment. How is this idea different?
For one thing, this is more or less an advisory commission. And so the legislature still has a role to play. They will have appointing authority, and they will also select from 3 to 5 maps that the commission draws for the congressional seats, the state house, the state senate, and the public education commission. That's how it's different. It doesn't mean that in the future we won't pursue an independent commission that acts independent entirely from the legislature, but that will require a constitutional amendment. And we can't do that in time for redistricting now in 2021.
So what this would do is an advisory board would create the maps instead of just having lawmakers all over the place drawing whatever they want to draw and then kind of hashing it out. The advisory board would present to the legislature, these are your 4 options. Pick from among these. What if they can't decide?
Well, we have a provision in the legislation that says if they cannot decide which one to draw, the commission will have identified which one the commission believed most satisfied the requirements of federal law, the Voting Rights Act, preserving communities of interest, etc. And that would then be submitted to the governor for approval. So we have that fail-safe approach because, frankly, the reason millions of dollars are spent on attorney fees and costs is because maps were not drawn, were not adopted.
Dr. Page, was there, in the atmosphere of your task force, did it feel very politically divided, or did it feel like everyone was kind of on the same page?
No pun intended there.
Yeah.
I thought everyone came with some expectations of the process being transparent, at least in the way we worked as a task force. Transparency, that we were looking to ensure that all the voices of New Mexico residents were included in the process of coming up with the maps, as the justice just mentioned. So I didn't sense that there was a divide in terms of some were for more legislative oversight and input versus representation from the broader communities that exist throughout New Mexico. So I think transparency was a goal that we all had in terms of how the process would work, how individuals would be allowed to have a voice in expressing their preference for a map or another type of map.
Mm-hmm. Justice Chavez, there's an unusual kind of mechanism in this proposal that gives a little bit of power to the Supreme Court. How does that work?
What we did with this is you have to redistrict within the calendar year of when the census comes out. And that hasn't happened in the past because of the appeal takes place after the legislature adopts a plan or plans. And so what we decided to do was actually try to use the Supreme Court as the exclusive jurisdiction to take a look at what the commission has done if somebody appeals one or more of the maps that were proposed. And so the appeal will go directly to the Supreme Court. It will be based on the record that was held between the public hearings, and the court could only annul or affirm the map. They cannot redraw the map, and then they would send it back down to the commission. But keep in mind that 3 to 5 maps are going to be recommended to the legislature, and so if only one map is appealed, and even if the Supreme Court annuls that map, there's still 4 others that were not appealed and could be adopted. So we've actually added the appeal process before it goes to the legislature. And that's very possible. If it doesn't happen, the Supreme Court would also have power to stay the consideration of the map that has been appealed. And that solves that problem. But I think the key, I think, to this redistricting commission is the fact that if you think about it, this is about giving voters a fair and equal opportunity to choose somebody who will best represent their interest. So it is them, the voters, who ought to actively participate in the drawing of these plans. And this act actually does that. Requires a minimum of 12 meetings. The first set is to identify communities of interest, minority groups that have a voting bloc, but the majority always can outvote them. And so you look at the VRA, you look at redistricting principles, you keep communities of interest together, and you learn all about that. You take that information, and then you go draw maps based on what you learned. And you catalog the information, and it's a record so that the legislature can see, so that the public has access to. Then you propose the maps as a rule, and you hold hearings with testimony, and then you use whatever you learned there to either tweak the maps that you have drawn and then go to yet another public hearing to adopt them. So the public knows exactly what you're doing. You have to evaluate the maps for compliance with federal law and the Redistricting Act. And everybody knows exactly what you've done and why you've done it.
And what you're saying, it doesn't sound shocking, but it is very different from the way it has worked in the past. Just so everybody knows, this mostly happens completely not in public. That's the way it has been done here. But at the end of the day, Dr. Page, these maps are not hard to draw. I mean, a computer can just spit out a pretty fair map. Isn't that right?
That's true. And we do have software now, and we were on the task force able to experience the use of some of that software to draw maps to meet the issues of or the criteria of compactness and other criteria that we want to achieve in terms of drawing fair districts. So one of the things that I think the task force really came together on was making sure that we had maximum public participation in coming up with an understanding of the redistricting process, but also in how those maps could be redrawn to reflect the communities of interest throughout the state. So the software is out there. There are several applications that we know that we can get out to the public and have them come up with maps that represent the interest in their locales.
Mm-hmm. So, let me ask both of you. Good government groups have tried for a long time to take this power away from elected officials and put it in the hands of some other less interested, less self-interested party. Why do you guys think that your plan has a better chance this year than those have in the past?
I can't tell you that we have a better chance, but I will tell you that the way that this act is drawn, it not only benefits the public, it also benefits the legislature. Because the legislature in the past has gone out, they met with groups in different regions of the state, but then they get back and whatever was told to them is really not synthesized or compiled for them. And so they sort of ignore it. We are required, or the commission would be required, to keep a record of all of the hearings, to summarize the information, to index it, to maintain it and make it available to the public and to the legislature. And not only that, when the maps are drawn, the commission has to evaluate every map in writing, summarize the justifications for the map, summarize why it's keeping together communities of interest, why the map does not dilute minority voting power, why they are compact, contiguous, etc. So everything is going to be provided to the legislature. And of course, they can still hold hearings. People can show up and testify about why they support one of the 5 maps over other maps, etc. So they are going to be better informed. And frankly, they don't get to choose who moves into their district or out of their district or what common interests now exist in their district. So it's important for them to adopt to a changing society.
For the first time in 30 years, Democrats they control both the legislature and the governor's office, and the path is very clear for them to gerrymander pretty hard. Why should Democrats give up that power now when they finally have it?
I would say to avoid being sued for gerrymandering. That's a primary reason. And you as a public official should not think of yourself as somebody who has official power, but as somebody who is a public servant. You serve the public, and you ought to honor our democracy by making sure that all people have a fair and equal opportunity to elect someone of their choice. That's the only thing we have going for us, and a love for our country, a love for our democracy is what should guide them.
And a commitment to the process of voting and access to voting. So, yeah, that's an interesting question, and I would agree with Justice Chavez.
Justice Chavez, Dr. Page, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we've had a chance to watch the interview. The obvious question here, Laura Sanchez, does this idea have a chance?
I really think it does. I mean, I think the time is right, and I think it's one that we need to pay attention to, and legislators need to pay attention to. We really have spent a lot of taxpayer money in the past in defending and working through the legal system, through the court judicial system, to have the courts essentially decide the lines. And that's because the maps that come out end up being so partisan, one way or the other. There's so much infighting, and they really can't agree to anything that's reasonable. And so you have to have a court to come in and make a decision, and that's very, very costly. So I think that this is an important approach that needs to be considered, and hopefully it will prevail in terms of a bill that gets passed this session.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Merritt, you're on the task force. I'm grateful that you are, honestly. Your brain power in this situation is needed. All right, we've got the commission would be 2 Dems, 2 Rs, 2 nonpartisan people chosen by this commission and a former Supreme Court justice. Is that the right mix in your view?
Absolutely, and the Democrats would be chosen by the legislature majority, or they'd be chosen by the legislature. The Democrats and the Republicans would be chosen by their caucus leaders. The third party, Decline to States Independence, would be chosen by the ethics, and then a retired Supreme Court justice. So that's some serious, I think, firepower, and you cannot be a former candidate or a former elected official. So it's also non-political. Okay. I really like that.
Well, that takes you out of the running.
Oh yeah, I'm out.
You and me. I was in for like 30 days.
Woo!
Which is enough, right?
Yes.
And the other part I really like is, I think it's the last line of the legislation is, should, despite all the precautions to this effect, should any of the maps be taken to court, no attorney's fees shall be awarded as a result of any litigation. Ha ha!
Wow, that is interesting. We'll have to see how that plays out.
Well, that takes out, that takes out the motivation of attorneys to take on these cases. That's really an important clause, because if you don't have attorneys willing to take this on and knowing that they're going to be able to recover fees, it becomes a different ballgame in terms of being able to pay for those fees.
That's fascinating. I had not thought about that. I'm so glad you got that in. Inez, interestingly, if you're a powerful Democrat, like I'm just going to pick, I don't know, Brian E. Golf, why would you give up this kind of leverage? Why would you go put it in the hands of other people? These are politicians. This is what they do.
Well, they may not. We'll see how they go. But I think someone like the speaker also wants to do the right thing. Even politicians who are there for power, they have to realize that just because Democrats are in the majority now, someday they'll be in the minority. So if they can set a system that is fair, that allows politicians to stop picking their voters and lets voters pick their leaders, we're going to be better off over the next 20, 30, 40 years. And we have become so partisan in part because of gerrymandering and redistricting in other states where the smaller populations have way more power than they should. And we've got to fix it. So even if you're giving up some of your power, that means it's going to be better for everybody. And we hope that leaders like Speaker Egoff and Republican leaders all believe that we have to do what's best for voters and for citizens, not just for themselves.
Merritt, it has to be said, though, this is the first time in 3 cycles we've got Democrats in the governorship, both sides of our House. Does this change anything in this discussion? Does that change anything, I should say better, in this discussion?
Well, that's the question, is why would they want to? And that's one thing that struck me, is sitting in on the task force where we had both Democratic and Republican legislators sitting in on the task force. And I think it's notable that it passed unanimously through the First House Committee. It's got appears support of over half the House right now. In the Senate, is sponsored by Senator Ortiz-Pino and Senator Moores. I sat in on an interview, Walt Rubel for KRWG asked, why would you do this? And Senator Ortiz-Pino said, because in 2031, we don't know that we're going to have both houses and the governor. We may not have this power. So why not do this for the rainy day? That's me paraphrasing.
But isn't this the game as it's played? I mean, Laura Simpson, let me go to you on that. I just got to think that, folks, people talk about fair redistricting all the time. But the simple fact is, this is politics, and you always want to have an edge. I don't care which party you're in, you always want to have an edge. Can we really sit down and do this equitably to both sides and have agreement on this?
Well, look, I think that this is the way it's been done, or not the commission, but the way it's currently been done has been the way in New Mexico. I don't think that's necessarily the best way or the only way.
Gotcha.
If you look at other states, they do it differently, and they do consider other communities in terms of they talked about in the interview the dilution of voting power. That's a huge issue around minorities in particular. And there's a lot of games playing going on. And I'll give you an example. Even legislators from one house or the other, and I'm not going to name names, but let's just say that if there's an open seat and a legislator who perceives they may want to run for that seat is just outside the boundaries, they'll do what they can to get into that seat so that now they're able to run for an open seat in the other house without too much, now you're an incumbent running, but you're not really, it's a new seat for you, but you've just drawn yourself into that seat. That has happened multiple times in past districts. And that means that a person who didn't live in that district previously, had no ties to that community per se, suddenly was able to, insert themselves into it. And people who may have wanted to run or had the ability to run or had been community leaders there aren't able to do so because they're now facing essentially an incumbent, somebody who's already got a war chest of funding to pour into this new race. I mean, that's the sort of thing where, it is going to take a lot of selflessness, which, the cynics will say doesn't exist among our electeds, but also it's not the most glamorous job to be an elected official. I mean, you run and you get, you fall on your face a lot, criticized for everything, you're not getting paid. It's not a super glamorous job, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of prestige and status that comes with it. And they need to be selfless enough to realize long-term, what does this mean? And how do you want New Mexico to be represented? Do we want new voices? Do we want those seats to reflect the community? Or do we want just people who have been in power to remain in power for generations without any new voices or, new ideas to come into it? And this impacts women, people of color, people in the intersection of females and minorities. And it's all about trying to look, be forward thinking in terms of determining these lines.
Great way to finish. Good segment there. Thanks again to all of you. I'm back in a moment with some final thoughts. Probably because the Super Bowl is less than a week past, I can't help a football cliche in considering the new numbers for COVID cases in our state, and with it, the yellowing and greening of counties across the state. Now, seeing positive numbers after a year-plus slog, with metrics headed in the right direction, and even better, some blessed relief for our healthcare workforce, it reminds me that some games, as the cliche goes, are won in the trenches. Other contests, you can move the ball downfield, but not COVID, not this opponent. We're going to have to grind this one out, guys, a day at a time until we can get vaccinations in arms statewide. Now, that's the nature of this game, but I'll also add this. Maybe we've done something well here. Maybe we can afford ourselves a quiet little pat on the back for a job on its way to being well done. The numbers look that good. Now, thanks again for joining us, for staying informed and engaged. We'll see you again next week in Focus.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the McCune Charitable Foundation. And the Nieper Natural History Programming Fund for KNME TV. And viewers like you.